Welcome. My name is Stephanie Atkinson, and I'm the CEO of Compass Intelligence. I'm here joined today with Jeff Lorbeck of Qualcomm. And Jeff, before we get started, can you give us a little bit of a background about your area of responsibilities?
Sure. I'm Senior Vice President and General Manager of Qualcomm's Connected Smart Systems Business Unit. In simpler terms, think about it as IoT.
Great, thank you. So today, there's a lot going on in the IoT ecosystem, the IoT market. A lot of folks call it a market, but in my personal opinion, there's a lot of moving markets that happen underneath that IoT umbrella. So before we dive into some of the more specifics around the ecosystem, I want to talk a little bit about some of the more pressing topics of the day. And one of those is supply chain. So many businesses, enterprises are really faced with supply chain challenges in terms of logistics and delivery and just getting access to equipment that they need to run their businesses. Can you talk a little bit about IoT and how it helps solve some of those challenges when it comes to the supply chain?
There are many applications of IoT in addressing the supply chain issues. Of course, it's a prominent issue even in the mainstream media, and one that we think a lot about. As it turns out, Qualcomm has been serving the tracking industry for many generations of tracking devices. And it's a spot-on fit for a cellular modem to be part of a device, and a tracking device put into a pallet, put on a truck, put in a box to track those items. More recently with the pandemic, we've been part of a number of cold chain deliveries. So vaccines are delivered. Many have to be maintained at a temperature. They can't exceed a temperature threshold. And we provide solutions that not only track the device, but they track the sensors that are associated with those devices. There is a huge opportunity in tracking, in supply chain, and logistics in general for modernization, for really a complete transformation. And so I think that with the pandemic and the supply chain issues, a lot of companies are motivated to invest in creating better outcomes.
And you know, to add on to that, another challenge that we're seeing in the industry is really specifically around just the worker shortage, and which is a huge opportunity for the IoT space in terms of automation, right? What are we going to automate? Because maybe we don't have the workers that we need to get things done. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in that space as well? Are you guys seeing the same thing that we're seeing?
We are, and again, our solutions span many different use cases and applications that address the issue of labor shortages and workers. Everything from robotics, and again, our technology and chipsets have been used in robotic solutions, consumer robotics, even like a cleaning robot at home, and now more and more advanced robotics, autonomous mobile robots, delivery robots, so machines that take a lot of labor out of delivering items. But it goes way beyond that. Even our industrial handhelds and ruggedized computers are really efficiency devices. They help a workforce become much more efficient and help address the worker shortage by becoming more efficient.
So you just talked about some of the products and solutions that you guys are offering. Can you give us a little bit more of a deep dive in terms of where you believe IoT, where you believe Qualcomm fits in the whole IoT ecosystem? Because many out there don't know all of the things that you guys do, and you guys are very busy in this space.
So a lot of people think of Qualcomm as a modem company, and we are. We're expert in cellular technologies, but also Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and other wireless connectivity technologies. But we're also expert in processing, in different processor categories. And for decades now, Qualcomm engineers, we've had a foot in the physical world and a foot in the digital world. And think of IoT as sensing, thinking, acting, communicating. There's a paradigm. It's often quoted that way. But it's just like people. We have senses, and our brains process those sensory inputs, and we act as a result of what our brains tell us to do. The same is true of IoT. So you'll hear our CEO, Cristiano Amon, talk about the connected intelligent edge. Really, the edge is where the sensing takes place and a lot of that processing. There's far too much data being generated at the edge to put all of those data into the cloud. It's not efficient. There are latencies. There are issues of security and privacy. So you want to process those data at the edge. And that's really where the Qualcomm solutions come into play. We have extremely powerful processors across a wide range of use cases and applications. So everything from very small machine learning, as an example, and that's measured in TOPS, or tera operations per second, to hundreds of TOPS and everything in between. So many, many different application and use case categories can be served by our silicon.
Well, that's very helpful. I think that when I think about Qualcomm, or I think about a lot of companies that think about Qualcomm, they're just not aware of all of the things that you could do in this space. So that's a great background to kind of introduce some of the things that we'll probably dive a little bit deeper into. So I want to talk about, you mentioned use cases, and I know that you guys have some strong industries, or what we call vertical markets, that you're focused on, over the year, or you're focusing on moving forward. Can you talk a little bit about what you're focused on, and are there some very specific industries that are important for you guys moving forward?
There are a handful on which we are focusing. Now, the entire global GDP is transforming digitally. So virtually every industry, every enterprise is digitally transforming to become more efficient, to reduce their consumption of energy, reduce the production of carbon dioxide, to be safer. So everything is transitioning, but we are focused on a handful of industries. So I mentioned earlier, we've been serving the industrial handheld market at scale for years. And these are efficiency tools that are used in transportation, logistics, retail, trucking, you name it. So transportation and logistics in general is a focus of ours. Again, it's a really good fit for our technology. We have a long, long history, going back even to the beginning of Qualcomm, of participating in that industry and making it stronger. Retail is another focus of ours. The brick and mortar retailers in particular are in an existential fight. They are having to become more efficient with their real estate, with the work of their associates, and they're trying to improve the experience of their customers. And that process was only accelerated by the pandemic, when many people went online to buy things. So transportation, logistics, retail, energy, and utilities. I mentioned earlier the whole drone and robotics and automated machinery. So there are a handful of industries in particular where the Qualcomm technology and chipsets, which are very advanced and support sophisticated applications, where they're really a spot-on fit, and we're beginning there.
You mentioned sustainability in energy, and I know energy is also an area that I think a lot of us in the industry talk about, because in order for us to scale IoT, we also believe in the grid, the infrastructure piece. It needs to be ready, it needs to be prepared to handle a lot of these things that are becoming autonomous or electrified. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing and what you're experiencing at Qualcomm with your customers or your partners in terms of the future of energy and how that's playing a very important role for IoT and some of the solutions out there today?
Again, energy is one of those topics in the news all the time now, obviously. And it's become a lot more complicated. Even our electrical grids are becoming more complicated. So we're sitting here talking now in San Diego. Many homes have solar panels. My home has a solar panel. It used to be the case that energy was produced at a single location and then distributed out over the electrical grid. Now energy is produced all over the grid, and it's also consumed in large measure by things like electric cars out in neighborhoods like my neighborhood. So in general, the grids are becoming more fragile. There's a lot more strain on them. With the recent heat wave here in San Diego, there was the risk of rolling power outages. So we are working with a number of utility companies. One in particular I can talk about, there was a public announcement. We're working with a company called Enel, the largest private utility in the world, and they created a subsidiary called Gridspertise, and we're working with them. They announced something called the Quantum Edge Device, or QED, and that's using an advanced Qualcomm processor. We'll have AI processing inputs from that grid at the edge of the digital electrical network. And with 5G, the vision is that you can monitor points along a network across many, many kilometers, and report back in real time, process those information, and with AI algorithms, more efficiently manage the grid. So energy is a big focus of a lot of our customers and partners in using our technology.
Now you mentioned 5G, and 5G has kind of been a little bit of a controversial topic, I think, in the analyst community, because we tend to overhype a lot of different topics. 5G is one of them. We get really excited about it. We've been talking about it for a few years, and things have been a little bit slower than I think the industry was expecting in terms of monetization, just the use cases that are out there. What are you guys seeing, and where do you play in this space, and how do you work with your carrier partners to kind of really help and support these use cases that are there, right? We all know they're there, but they're just not moving in as fast of a direction as we would have hoped.
So I've been at Qualcomm for 28 years, and I saw the transition to 3G and 3G to 4G and 4G to 5G, and now even the beginning of the conversations regarding 6G. So I have the benefit of being through these G transitions over and over again. But I'm impatient. I would like for things to move faster, but my colleagues tell me, remember back even as recently as 4G. One of the issues I think that we're seeing in 5G and 5G for industrial applications, we have to come down the cost curve. Right now, 5G modems are expensive, but the standards defining organization that governs the 5G technology, 3GPP, in their releases, in the requirements that they're releasing, they have a roadmap to simpler modems. So I can't announce what we're doing, but you can imagine that just like if the past is a guide to the future, and it is, 3G, 4G, we came down that cost curve. So we are investing on the roadmap of 5G to bring us down that cost curve. The other thing is, in the early phases of the deployment of 5G, a lot of the ecosystem, and I have said over and over again, my team knows that I like to say this, IoT is a team sport. It requires many ecosystem participants. None of us can bring these solutions that I'm talking about, these use cases and applications, by ourselves. So we rely on an ecosystem of partners. Well, among that ecosystem are the partners who are providing the infrastructure to support 5G. And we need to be able to integrate and debug and refine some of these features and functions that are required for 5G in industrial settings, Industry 4.0. And so a lot of the initial focus has been on the commercial deployment of 5G. So 5G for consumers, a huge new space, or it's certainly become much bigger in 5G, is fixed wireless access.
Right.
So consumer premise equipment, having 5G into your home. Maybe there's no cable available, no fiber available, but you get 5G in, and on the other side you can have a Wi-Fi mesh network, as an example. So that has been a big focus for operators around the world. They need to pay the bills. They need to pay for these network deployments. But I can tell you, in the background, our activity with the industry continues unabated. So just 2 weeks ago, Qualcomm hosted here in San Diego a meeting of the 5G ACIA. And it's an industry group of industrial and enterprise partners who are specifically focused on 5G use cases. And they help inform the standards defining organization on the features and functionality required. So we have a number of trials and really some fairly deep technical collaboration with these companies. So I can tell you, yes, I'm impatient. I wish this transition were happening faster, but we're working to come down the cost curve. We're working with our industrial partners to integrate and test the functionality that really will be the backbone of these 5G use cases.
And to add on top of that, another just, I guess, complication that we're hearing from the enterprise is that it also is a trust issue. Traditionally, going from 2G to 3G to 4G, we were not talking about, the power of how 4G could change the enterprise, and now we are talking about that. So a lot of it comes down to educating the enterprise and them understanding how does this really apply to their industry? How does it change their industry? If I have wired infrastructure, why do I need wireless infrastructure? So what are those use cases? And so them understanding how to apply that to their industry or their business is something that we as an industry are, continue to have to work on in terms of educating them.
The education is certainly a big part of it. And I just think that it's going to take time for people to really get their heads around What are those use cases? It's like asking Thomas Edison after he invented the light bulb, can you please tell us all the appliances that will use electricity? 5G really just emerged, and trying to predict all of the different use cases. We know that it has, that it was designed from the ground up to be very different from prior generations.
Right.
It supports massive broadband. It supports a massive number of devices. It has features like ultra reliability and low latency.
Right.
And how do these things combine to create value? I'm a technologist. I love technology, but at the end of the day, the people who benefit the most from this technology don't care about the technology, and they shouldn't have to.
Right.
They've got their enterprise challenges. They want to optimize this, or they want to solve that. And we need 5G and the processing that occurs at the edge to serve those needs. But that will take time.
I agree with you there. That's something that we're on the same page with. So you mentioned Edge, and Edge is definitely top of mind for a lot of our customers, a lot of those that are operating in the IoT space. And a lot of times the conversation is really both Edge and AI. How are Edge and AI coming together to really provide that real-time intelligence, the data that we need to make very fast decisions? And are you seeing any particular industries that there's maybe a little bit more of an opportunity for movement from an edge computing or a distributed architecture perspective? What are you seeing?
So I began my career at Qualcomm 28 years ago as a systems engineer. And I regard this current age as the golden age of systems engineering, because we have so many tools in our toolbox now. We have this very, very powerful edge computing capability. So we have these processors. I tell my children who are now at university, one studying electrical engineering, that his little smartphone has 1,000 times more processing capability than the PC that sat on my desk when I was getting a PhD in electrical engineering. So we have very powerful edge processing. We also have the cloud and cloud providers who operate at hyperscale.
Right.
So the use cases and applications we're talking about, they can be implemented in different ways to optimally use the resources available in the year 2022 and beyond. One of the most ubiquitous use cases for IoT, and again I go back to that analogy of the human person and our senses, is smart camera. Even today, if you look at the bits that are zooming across the internet, most are video bits. And camera will be one of the most prevalent sensors. So think of camera as a sensor. It's sensing the photons in its environment. And those bits coming from that camera sensor need to be processed. Well, the amount of data that is being generated at the edge because of all these sensors is just exploding.
Right.
And it would become very expensive, even in terms of energy, to move all of these bits into the cloud. So I recently attended an industry event on transportation, and Scott Guthrie from Microsoft was a featured keynote. It was a fireside chat, actually. And even coming from Microsoft, who is a hyperscale cloud giant, he was talking about the need for a significant amount of processing at the edge. So whether you're on device doing processing at the near edge, in the fog, up in the cloud, it's some people define 5 different levels of remoteness from the actual device. As I said earlier, it's really the golden age for systems engineers to figure out, based on cost constraints and privacy and security and latency and all the other factors that go into an optimal engineering solution, what is the best solution that I can provide?
Now that's very helpful. One of the things that we think about edge, edge computing is something that we're in deep discussions with our customers. And it is. They're all trying to figure out what, for an enterprise, how do we make sense of what we should push to the cloud versus what we should process at the edge, and what do we do in between? And really, we know that some of these big corporations, especially some of these that have branches across the United States or globally, that they're going to have a combination, right? They might have some things that are definitely computed and they're processed at the edge, and they're pushing automating actions real time, and they're pushing that data to important stakeholders to act. Maybe there's some manual, maybe some of it's automated, but we will always rely on the cloud, and there will be data that we're pushing to the cloud. And I think it also comes down to some of the use cases. How often are we pinging the data? Is it important? Is it critical? Is it part of a critical communications plan for my company or my operations or my manufacturing facility? So a lot of factors involved when it comes to prioritizing data and understanding where this data needs to sit and how to process it.
Years ago, people would describe this battle between cloud and edge as the cloud edge war. There was a cloud edge war. I feel like that's behind us now.
I do too.
I feel like people are going, it's not cloud or edge, it's cloud and edge, and at least 2 or 3 different layers in between. And no solution should preclude really combinations of cloud and edge. So a great example, even using artificial intelligence and processing camera inputs at the edge is the example of federated learning. So there are inferences, there are neural networks at the edge being processed by those devices. And they do a great job. But over time, those models can be improved. And there's a process of federated learning where the inputs from many, many different sensors, there are data that can go in the cloud, and the cloud can say, okay, the AI is working well, or the ML is working well, but we can do better. And so by combining inputs from many different sensors in the cloud, you can make the edge smarter. So the cloud and edge can serve each other.
Right.
Just continually to refine the algorithms and to improve the outcomes.
It made me think about the use case of the smart lighting at cities. Over the past 3-4 years, that's been a very heavy focus for smart cities is the smart lighting piece. And what they found is you have that infrastructure already there. We could add our smart cameras to that infrastructure or start to augment some of the connectivity that we're already leveraging or using for these for the lights and some of the sensors, and add additional capabilities onto this light pole or wherever it's located. And we're starting to see some very innovative use cases around gunshot detection. So they're listening, they're watching. So there's a lot of different things to think about. For cities, you've got this infrastructure in place, and we've been talking about infrastructure for a while now because of the big infrastructure bill, and that's where a lot of the funding and the monies and the concentration is going to be heading towards. And you mentioned transportation being one of them. I'd like to talk a little bit about transportation because there's a lot of moving parts when we think about transportation, especially within the cities. We have the intelligent traffic management systems, we have the autonomous trend, and we're the grid that needs to be prepared for the electrification and the autonomous vehicles. Can you talk a little bit about some of the innovation that you're seeing in this space and what Qualcomm is doing to operate in this space? There's a lot of exciting things happening, and I know you have some things to share here.
There's a lot to talk about. We could talk about this for a whole week. But even going back to the beginning of the question or your comment, the smart street lights. We refer to those sometimes as the beachfront property in cities, because you have power to that pole.
Right.
And once you have power to that pole, you can add all of the connectivity technologies. You can provide public Wi-Fi or 5G repeaters. So a lot of different wireless connectivity. You can do the smart street lights. You can add the microphones for gunshot detection. You can add the cameras for people counting or license plate detection. So it turns out to be this platform possibility. In fact, we on our campus have smart streetlights. We're working with a vendor, and so that was one of our first use cases that we implemented as part of the Qualcomm Smart Campus. And we have a network operations center, and it's always very exciting for me to showcase that smart streetlight. It's not just a light. It's almost like a Swiss Army knife, and really it's up to the city to decide what use cases and applications are most important to them.
That's a great analogy. I haven't heard the Swiss Army knife, but that's great.
Maybe I mixed the beachfront property and the Swiss Army knife, but they both seem to apply. Okay, but in terms of the smart transportation, the whole C-V2X, so cellular, vehicle to X, and the X can be vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to pedestrian. It's the ability for all of these, for the infrastructure and the cars and the pedestrians and other things to communicate inside the city. Several years ago, I was living and working in China, and I had a driver, and he was every day driving me to and from work, and I would get caught in traffic. And as a systems engineer, I would think to myself, we have all the technology available that we need today to help mitigate this traffic problem, not only in China, but in cities across the world, really every major metropolitan area. We know what the traffic patterns look like. We know what the streets are. We have GPS in our vehicles. So it becomes very apparent that there can be a huge impact to traffic, transportation, even the supply chain problem that we talked about earlier, using technology that already exists. But here again, it's more of an issue of how do we get the right ecosystem partners to collaborate on solutions than in coming up with new technology. Having said that, there is CV2X, and I think it's going to enable a lot of functionality that is important to human beings, even just reducing the number of traffic fatalities for drivers, for pedestrians. I think personally that's one of the things I'm most excited about is the impact to people's safety.
Yeah, I know a lot of cities, when they think about they're putting together their city plans, there's a couple of areas of focus, and one is just reducing fatalities and reducing just the sheer number of wrecks that happen within the city. And then two is safety. I think a lot of focus has kind of come into play after COVID around the safety of citizens, of pedestrians. And so that kind of goes in line along with that. And then of course the third piece is more of the green, the sustainability efforts that are taking place within the city. And some of that kind of ties back to, being just more socially conscious, but also we've been talking a lot about ESG because that just comes into a lot of conversations when you start to read through the corporate reports and whatnot. But green is very, very important now. And it's very, very important for the younger generation, especially as they think about who they want to work for and where they want to work. And I know that that's an important piece to Qualcomm. And it's also an important piece to some of the IoT, solutions that are out there is how we're really becoming more conscious and how we're really becoming more focused on our carbon emissions and whatnot. So can you talk a little bit about how maybe some things that you're seeing from an IoT perspective and how we might be able to kind of bring that into play when it comes to some of the ESG initiatives?
There's a big category of IoT use case that we haven't talked about yet, and it's one of my favorites. It's smart building. So even this building we're sitting in wasn't built that long ago, but in terms of smartness, it's not that smart. If you compare that with a model smart building that ties together many different sensor technologies. So for example, rooms can have infrared detectors. It can detect when people are present. And especially when you have this hybrid work environment where some people are in the office and some people are at home, you need pretty smart buildings to understand, well, how many people are really here, right, and where are they? Where are they distributed throughout the building? So again, as part of the Qualcomm Smart Campus, we actually implemented some smart buildings, and including older buildings that have been built, say 15 or 20 years ago. And we were quite surprised. Once you have those data, once you have those sensors in the building, helping to inform how is energy being used, how is power being consumed, you can make much smarter decisions about that space and how that space can be managed. So I think in our experience, we're seeing building power consumptions, the potential for 10, 20, 30% reduction in energy consumption in a building by implementing smarter technologies.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that because when I think about like the Qualcomm campus, some of the conversations that we're having even with like higher education institutions is we find that they operate very much like a mini municipality. Mm-hmm. They have transportation, they have buildings, they have their own clinics. They really do operate like a mini municipality. And so a lot of times what we're seeing in terms of the solutions to, for logistics and tracking and just safety on campuses, along the same lines of what you're talking about with the smart buildings. The other area you mentioned was this energy conservations, HVAC. I know that, and also with COVID, is understanding, like you said, how many people are in the building. And some of those HVAC systems actually clean the air, mm-hmm, right? And mm-hmm. So there's a lot of innovation that has come about as a result of the pandemic. So I now want to shift gears and talk about the future. There's a lot of exciting things right now. When we think about emerging technologies at Compass Intelligence, AI, those are givens. Machine learning, that's a given. Some of the autonomous vehicle space, that's a given. And you mentioned robotics as well. What else is on the horizon? What's getting you super excited that you see down the road that's going to be really innovative for industry or even the industrial side, or anything that you think is going to be just very impactful on the world?
All of the ingredients that you mentioned, I would say, are part of solutions that I think will be very impactful. But more specific technologies that I personally find very interesting. And I think it's almost like, maybe Qualcomm is not well understood. I think some of these technologies are not well understood as well as they can be or should be. One is augmented reality. And again, at a recent trade show, I saw one of the best demos ever of augmented reality. And it makes perfect sense. You have aging baby boomers, many of whom are experts in technology and on pieces of equipment, but their numbers are declining. And so you can augment that workforce of these subject matter experts, these technical experts, graybeards, I'm a graybeard, with a cadre of younger workers who will learn on the job. You send the younger technician out to a job site or a factory or to some place where a piece of machinery has to be serviced. And the combination of that younger worker wearing augmented reality glasses and the subject matter expert sitting back in the headquarters and being able to download detailed parts diagrams and exploded machine diagrams, and being able to guide that technician step by step in real time and really just drawing circles around things in a virtual world, where that little diagram is overlaid on top of the image coming from the physical device. I think that's a capability that I'm personally very excited about, even as a do-it-yourself person. I can imagine new business models where I pay somebody to just help me for 10 minutes, fixing something, a car or a refrigerator or something around the home. But really, it addresses not only that worker shortage issue, it makes it much more efficient in having to send multiple people to a place where something needs to be serviced. You're sending that one technician. It strikes a lot of notes.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I've seen some use cases with aviation, and the aviation technicians, needing just to really super detailed how-to and parts identification and where do they go grab the parts off the shelf, and it walks them through all of that piece by piece. My husband's a helicopter pilot, so we talk a lot about some of the automation that's taking place in that sector, so it's pretty interesting. Now, I want to finalize our last question with really more around Qualcomm. You guys have a portfolio of partners and alliances, and you work with a lot of really big companies out there. What are you focused on in terms of growing those relationships? Because a lot of times they're facing those enterprise customers. What are you focused on in terms of growing those relationships and really helping improve kind of all of those relationships to get you to that next level with the enterprise customer and the industrial customer?
So it is the case that much of our business historically has been driven by a small number of very large customers, and they continue to be vitally important to Qualcomm. But I mentioned earlier, IoT is a team sport. It's much more highly fragmented across many different industries, many different use cases. One of the areas where we're focusing now is identifying thought leaders in each of these industries. Companies who are forward-leaning in terms of their investment in digital transformation, who have the hunger, the desire, the need, in many cases, to become more efficient, to digitally transform. And we work with them. Again, it takes more than just the enterprise and Qualcomm, or the industry and Qualcomm. It takes a vendor community. It takes a cloud provider. It takes a systems integrator to bring the full solution to life. But identifying where can we have the most impact? Where can we create the most value together? And I've long since abandoned this notion that it can be Qualcomm who can create the entire solution and bring that to the enterprise or the industry. I think one of the biggest elements of value that we can possibly bring is our willingness to work together as a partner as a member of a group of companies who have to work together to create the solutions. So industry by industry, I mentioned earlier the retail industry, the energy utilities industry, transportation, logistics. We're working closely with big industrial companies and enterprises. We've also begun a much more formal engagement of systems integrators, because as we create technologies, we want to be able to quickly promulgate those solutions. And some of these systems integrators and enterprise solution providers themselves have thousands, even tens of thousands of clients.
Right.
And so how do we very quickly take value that has been created in solving a problem, in developing a use case and application? How do we quickly fan that out across the industry?
That's great.
Team sport.
I agree with you. I think that in order for us to really move to that outcomes approach that we're all talking about in the industry and really understand the use cases of these industries, we have to get to that contextual point of better understanding what they need and making it happen. So I appreciate you joining me today, and
been
I'll
my
look
pleasure.
forward to the next discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.